Hi, everyone. Happy Wednesday, I think it is. So I'm very excited today to have Christopher on our channel, or on my channel, rather, but he has his own channel. We can talk about that. Christopher, oh, hang on. I have screwed up somewhere because I'm getting feedback. Hang on. This is totally
Sure.
my fault. Okay. Let's just do. Hang on. Okay, I have wrangled my internet.
Mm.
Let's see. Christopher is a longtime Philadelphia public school teacher, education writer, and track coach. He's a certified Pennsylvania counselor with an MED in multicultural education. I'm curious about your perspective on multiracial whiteness already, Christopher. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Um, his articles on school reform have appeared in numerous publications, including the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Federalist, and Real Clear Politics. He is a member of No Left Turn in Education and a co-chair of the group's Teachers Committee. And his new book, Exploring White Fragility, Debating the Effects of Whiteness Studies on America's Schools, challenges critical race theory and uses both existing research and anecdotal classroom observations to examine the effects of anti-racism and the push to dismantle white supremacy culture in education. He does have a YouTube channel. He has a website. All that is in the description below. Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah.
That sounded great. It sounded really like it was really important.
Yeah. Well, I think your work is important. That's part of why you're here. But definitely so I mean, I just want to start with a little bit of your background. So you've been in the trenches as a public school teacher. Tell me about that.
So I've been teaching for 24 years in Philadelphia. I grew up with it. My father taught for 36 years in Philly. I taught for 24 years. I ended up getting my master's in multicultural education. I've been coaching on and off track and field, cross country, coached basketball for a while. Then I went back. I got my certification. I'm also a Pennsylvania school certified counselor too. So I've incorporated some counseling. I didn't want to leave the classroom and get into counseling, but I like it. I like the classroom. I like the kids. There's been opportunities to, I think, maybe get into administration here and there and do different things. But it's like after 24 years, I'm still here. I still enjoy it. So I guess we'll see, how it goes. But I'm planning on staying in the classroom with the kids. I enjoy it.
Well, and I think that, what I really like about your background is that you've got experience kind of before white fragility and after white fragility.
Yes.
Right? So talk to us a little bit about when you started seeing these ideas of like whiteness studies and white fragility popping up and what you thought about when that happened.
So I guess the first thing that brought it onto my radar, maybe 3-4 years ago, I had a student who wrote an essay. I have my students do persuasive essays in the beginning of the year. So this one female student, she's a really good student, really critical thinker. She was writing a paper. I forget the exact topic, but one of her arguments was about white privilege. I saw her use the phrase white privilege. And I was thinking, okay, because we never really talked about that in my class. I teach English, by the way. Mm-hmm. So I was like, that got on my radar. And of course, my master's in multicultural education, which was, over 10 years ago, it was a little different back then. So things have changed. Multicultural education was different. Now it's anti-racism and it's like a totally different ball game. But I was seeing these phrases come up. Now my students, for the most part, it's not very political. They get along with each other. They're from, many different backgrounds. You have, 30% white, 30% Latino, 30% African-American. It's a real good mix and they naturally get along. But when I started to see these things popping up, I just got more curious about it. And the more that I wanted to see what was currently going on with anti-racism, because like I said, multicultural education changed. And the more that I explored it, the more I saw it was getting, it was actually getting kind of radical, some of the things that I saw. And then, of course, everything traced back to Robin DiAngelo. And then she came on my radar a couple years ago. And then I was reading through her things. I read her book, What Does It Mean to Be White? It's about white racial literacy. That was before her White Fragility book. And I read that book. I got into white fragility. I started looking at Kendi's things. And just the more that I read, the more that I noticed it was veering off from what I learned in multicultural education with my master's degree. It was different. There was something else to it. And I just thought that the whole idea was not totally, it seemed part of it was counterproductive. It seemed like it was more divisive and polarizing. So that's how it got on my radar. kind of.
Well, let's talk about the differences in multicultural, because if someone has a master's degree in multicultural education, I think that those of us that are in this space might have very specific connotations about what that means and what that
Mhm,
says about you that might not be true because you got it before all of this craziness started. So what
mhm.
has changed in that whole philosophy since you got your master's?
I think multicultural education, traditionally 10, 12 years ago, it was more about diversity, meaning we need to make sure we have all voices. We need to make sure everybody has an equal voice at the table. We do diverse authors. Kids are included, because things are definitely getting more diverse as time goes on in the United States. But it seemed like it was more about helping, promoting diversity rather than disrupting and targeting and disrupting things. Today, it seems like it's not just about promotion of diversity and helping people, making sure everybody has equal access, but it goes that extra step. And it's like, we have to now target and disrupt things. And I feel that it's that extra step where it's like, you don't need to target and disrupt one group to help another group. I don't think you need to do that. So that's how it's different. It's just, it seems like it's more about agitation, provocation. Like multiculturalism wasn't necessarily about agitating and provoking people to become aware of things. It seems like this is more about activism. The anti-racism is more about activism, and it's about, it is about provoking. So people notice, like they'll say, so white people know that they have a race and that they're privileged. That's kind of part of it. White people live in an isolated bubble. They don't realize that they have a privilege and that they have a race. So we have to kind of agitate, provoke, confront so that they realize this and we can bring about change. And I don't necessarily think you need to do it like that.
Right. No, I totally agree. So what it sounds like to me is when you got started in this path, you were you were doing real diversity and
Mhm.
inclusion. You were
Yes.
presenting a wide variety of ideas and including other things that, are not just from like white people, but from other backgrounds, other types of authors, things like that. And
Mhm.
now I think if I'm understanding correctly, the difference is that now it's not just about including authors from a variety of different backgrounds and experiences. It's
Mhm.
about specifically eliminating, white authors, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. That movement, disrupt text. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's this movement. It's called hashtag disrupt text, and it's all about getting. They target Shakespeare. It's about targeting whiteness, getting rid of
Oh,
whiteness, white authors. We need to diversify. And there's just something about that just isn't to me. It's not, obviously it doesn't seem like it's very unifying, and it's not about communication and understanding, but it's that extra step. Instead of saying, let's find ways to communicate, let's find ways to make sure everybody has a voice, let's try and find ways to make sure that this is very diverse and everybody has equal access and everybody can have a good quality of life. It's the extra step of, we have to target and disrupt. And I don't think you need to do it. I don't think you need to add that extra layer in there. I understand there's some systemic racism because race and racism is a very complex equation and there's so many different parts to it. And obviously there's some systemic racism, and you look at the history of the United States, there's going to be an effect because
mhm.
that's real. And we do need to address that. But we also need to address other things. And it seems like now the movement it's just all one thing, and it's all just race. Every single disparity in the United States is only the result of one thing, racism. And I think that's not a holistic way of looking at it, and it's not helping everybody because there's other things you need to do besides
Mhm.
that.
Mhm. So you mentioned that the first time you saw this show up in the classroom was like, what was it, like 4 or 5 years ago when you had a student writing a paper about white privilege?
Yes.
What's happened
Yes.
since then?
I think I'm pretty fortunate because where I teach in the Philadelphia School District, and we're just, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's like you have certain school districts that are micromanaging everything, and they're all the way at the top, and they can bring in all this stuff because they're able to do it. A lot of the suburban districts, this is coming in the woke stuff or whatever, anti-racism in certain ways. But I think in Philadelphia, it's kind of kept more grounded and real. So I don't see it coming in as much. I've been in a bunch of workshops this year that were focused on equity. But the interesting thing about the equity, at least in my experience for the trainings that I'm in, we're talking about educational equity in terms of giving kids rigorous academic instruction that's up to grade level. So when we talk about equity, we talk about equity of instruction, because a lot of times what happens is you say, we're going to meet the kids where they are. And if kids have certain challenges, you may lower the bar so you can reach them and then bring the bar up. But what happens is when you lower the bar and you try and meet them where they are, the bar never comes up. So sometimes students never get up to grade level. So we've been concentrating on making sure that all students are getting access to rigorous grade level instruction. And that's equity. It's not about, dividing people into, stereotyping them, putting them into camps. White people have privilege, people of color are targeted or have their victims. Luckily, it's not really going down that road. It's just about instruction, in my experience.
What do you think about the school system in Boston, I believe, that actually eliminated advanced placement classes because they found out that too many white students were in it and they wanted to just get rid of that option entirely?
I think it's unfortunate because there's kids who need the AP classes. There's students of color that need the AP classes. Mm-hmm. And I think especially when it comes to things like math, the students, they need to be challenged. They need to be at their ability level. I mean, we can't pretend that all ability levels are the same. All ability levels are not the same when it comes to things like math. So if you want to make sure you're giving these kids the kind of instruction that they need to challenge them so they can go on to be, get into these programs that have high level math and they don't get it, I think it's unfortunate. Who is it supposed to help? To me, that's like lowering the bar. It's like we're going to go to the lowest common denominator and then other kids suffer, including students of color who want to have that.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. So let's talk about your book a little bit. So exploring white fragility, debating the effects of whiteness studies on America's schools. What are the effects of whiteness studies on America's schools?
Sure. So the three ones that I talk about in the introduction are this. The first thing is the anti-racism trainings, critical race theory, these kinds of things. And I don't want to paint it with a broad brush because in certain situations it does do some good. It's needed. It's just when it gets to be a little bit too radical that this stuff can have a problem. So when you're talking about whiteness studies, anti-racism, critical race theory, the way D'Angelo presents it and Kendi presents it, the first thing is I've noticed it provokes some resentment with teachers. Especially when you look at the data on when people go to these anti-bias trainings, it doesn't do anything really. It's either neutral or people come out of it and they feel resentful. So the first effect is there's some resentment, and I don't think that that's a good thing because when you go back into your classrooms or in your communities and you feel like you have this resentment, that's an effect. That's a negative side effect. Another thing is discipline. The discipline when the Obama administration, when they were doing the race-based discipline, the Department of Education and the Department of Justice joined together and they had that dear colleague letter that said, when we discipline students, we need to make sure that it's balanced and proportionate among the races. So there were racial quotas. And they didn't necessarily look at the actions or the behaviors. They just cared about the result. Was it proportionate? And if it wasn't, there were the threats of you could lose money. So that the Hoover Institute did a study on the effects of that. And they found that this race-based discipline was harming the learning environment. And they sampled teachers of color. They oversampled teachers of color in this study. And they went to urban schools as well. And they found that, including teachers of color, they were saying it's making the learning environment more difficult to teach. The students aren't learning as much. So the second effect is the discipline is suffering from this. And then when you take the morale of the teachers and the discipline, it trickles down into the instruction. The instruction, in my opinion, not necessarily in my experience, but the things I've been reading and seeing from other teachers, the instruction is suffering because number one, I think pre-service teachers who are in college and they're learning and they get this critical race theory, they have these preconceived ideas. And I think it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy. They hear so many times, white privilege, whites are advantaged, they're privileged. We have to make sure we look at them and we target this whiteness. Students of color, they're disadvantaged. In certain cases, they're victims. They have challenges. So that's what they hear. Whites are privileged, students of color are victims. And then they go into the classroom and they start to teach. And I think that there's an effect on that. I think that it does have an effect on expectations, whether they know it or not. And I think it affects the way that they interact with the students. And I think all these things makes a difference with education. And finally, one of the things too is when you're valuing this kind of identity politics. It seems like all this is centered around identity politics. So it's like the students, they're more interested. Critical race theory seems to be more interested in making students future activists. So they're going to get active than rigorous instruction. And it's going in the wrong direction. We should be giving them, they need to find their way out of challenges and through rigorous instruction, not through necessarily always through activism and identity politics. So there's some of the effects.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God, there's so much to unpack there. And I think one of the things that you said that is most interesting to me is I don't believe that if people don't believe that success is possible, they can never achieve whatever they want, right? If you don't think that that's a possibility, why would you ever even go after it? And I think that
Sure.
can be applied in a lot of different areas. But what I was thinking of when you were speaking just then is, if teachers are going into the classroom believing that the experiences of some students is not going to result in them achieving at a higher level, why would they have any incentive to push students who might have all the potential in the world to achieve at that level? They're going to keep them down here.
That's interesting. I guess D'Angelo, they would deny that. They would say, oh, this is all about making sure that we have high expectations. They would try and say it like that. We want to make sure that we're having high expectations, but they're doing it. Yeah, that's my same reaction. Mm-hmm. When you're constantly generalizing and stereotyping kids into groups, how is it increasing the expectations? And I really believe it. You said it. They have these expectations, but are they really raising the expectations? I don't know. I don't know if they are.
Well, and it seems as though if they're only looking at these students based on what the color of their skin is, then what are they missing in regards to that relationship? Does that make sense?
Yes, sure. I mean, it makes sense because you're not connecting with the student as a person. I mean, the first thing you do with your students is you connect with them. And to me, it's not about race. It's about learning style and personality. If you can understand their personality, their learning style, and you can connect and bond and you can teach the students, I think that has little to do with race. There's some race in there. Race is in the beginning. Race is on the surface. There's race. But eventually you get past it and then you're just with the student. People talk about color blindness and it's like, oh, there's no such thing as color blindness. We see color. Of course we see color. But the point is you move past it. You see that you have, an African-American student or a Latino student. And then for me, it's like, because I've been teaching for so long, it's like, I just teach them. I figure out their learning style, have a good connection and then teach them. I don't care about the identity as much. I don't teach through identity.
Do you remember that movie Finding Forrester? Yes,
I do.
I love that movie. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. It came out when I was in college, I think, so a long time ago. But it strikes me that in Finding Forrester, the whole idea is that you had this really, really smart, talented Black kid that lives in the inner cities that took an IQ test or something at his school one day, and they found out, oh, you're you're way smarter than everyone else here. And so he got to go to a private school on a scholarship. And once he got there, he had this kind of bastard English teacher that didn't believe that he was that smart or that capable, and essentially started questioning, when he turned in something that was really, really good, the teacher was like, you didn't really write this, and questioned his ability, and it was this whole big thing. But what's striking to me is that teacher, when that movie was made 20 years ago, that teacher, was obviously being racist and classist towards this student, right? But it strikes me that a teacher that buys into critical race theory would do exactly the same thing today. They would do exactly the same thing. They would look at that student because he has very dark skin. They would say, he comes from this background. He's disadvantaged. He has all these things working against him. He can't possibly perform at this standard of expectation. They would be treating him exactly the same way. Do you agree with that?
You know what? I see your point, and I agree with it to a certain point. I just like to look at how they would argue this, like how D'Angelo might argue this. They would say that the purpose of looking at race and identity is to make sure that you don't stereotype. They would say it's to make sure that you get at your own implicit biases so that you don't do that. So I see what you're saying. I think the result is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think that they are going in there, and in a way they are doing it. I think it's making it worse. But I do agree with you. When you're constantly looking at kids according to their identity, and you are categorizing them by race. It's true. You're putting them into camps. I agree. There's going to be situations where teachers are going to teach their children through that racialized lens, and it can have an effect. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, so, the other thing I wanted to ask you about is this new idea that has come up recently called multiracial whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
Have you encountered this at all?
I don't know about that. I'm not sure about that. Yeah, I don't know about that one.
All right. All right. So, essentially multiracial whiteness is essentially the idea that you don't even have to be white to be engaged in whiteness anymore. You can be any
Okay.
race at all. If you question critical race theory and you are Black or you're Latino or you're Native American or what have you, they say that you are it's multiracial whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems like generally critical race theory in general and Robin DiAngelo's approach is anyone that questions their philosophy, well, let me ask you this. Let me phrase this in the form of a question.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way to question white fragility in a way that does not lead you to, in a way that does not lead them to saying that you are more racist or more fragile for questioning the ideology?
Is there any way to question it without them saying that you suffer from white fragility, kind of?
Yes.
Okay. No, there's not. There's not. It's built in. That's the funny part about it. It's not. It's just like with Ibram X. Kendi. He gives you the choice, the fallacy of the false dilemma, the false choice. You're either with me and you're an anti-racist and you're a hero and you're courageous and you're going for justice, or you disagree with my philosophies and my ideas and you're a racist and you're not on board. He wouldn't call the person directly a racist, but he'd say that they believe in racist ideas or racist policies. Mm-hmm. But it's just like we said with DiAngelo, it's the white fragility. You can't disagree. It's not a conversation. It's not a dialogue. It's not, hey, let's have a debate. Let's explore ideas. Let's talk about these things. It's basically just an indoctrination. Here's my ideology. You have to accept it. We can't talk about it. And the interesting thing is DiAngelo never debates. Yes. She never debates. And she I think she admits that she won't, but she doesn't debate because that's not what it's about. It's not about talking about the ideas. It's just about lecturing, indoctrinating people with the ideology. That's what it's all about. And it's unfortunate because how do you make your position stronger when you don't even debate it, when you don't even challenge, people challenge your ideas and you can go through the scientific method and try and prove things false and make it stronger. But with critical race theory, white fragility, it's like these things can only be proven true. There is no falsification. It's not part of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's too, it's almost one of those things that, I don't blame Robin DiAngelo because I think that her ideas, some of them are very indefensible. And I think that she knows that, but I think she makes a lot of money on those ideas. Who I blame in these scenarios are the people that continue to hire Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi, because, why would you want to hire someone that literally cannot defend their ideas when they're challenged? I don't understand that.
Yeah, I think I think part of it is also in a way like the trend. I think this whole thing with critical race theory and anti-racism, again, I always have to come back and say parts of it are well-meaning. We obviously need to take care of certain issues in society. But when you're looking at it as a whole, I think there's different parts to it. I break it down into three parts when it comes to critical race theory. There's the people who totally believe in it. It's like the dogma. It's the ideology, like Kendi and DiAngelo and all those people who follow it blindly. They just follow it blindly. There's that segment. Then there's the segment of the people who are the opportunists. They know that they can get on board with this and it gives them a great opportunity, whether it's money or whether it's networking or whatever. They could care less about it, but they just want to get on board with it because they know it's great opportunity. And I think some corporations do that. And then there's another segment of people who don't agree with it and feel as though it's not the correct answer, but they're like kind of the silent majority. They're afraid. They're intimidated. They can't speak out against it because it's not, you could get silenced, you could be intimidated. And plus, if you're a business and, you want to sell your product, you figure you want to be part of this network so you can network your product. And if you're not on board, you're not going to be part of this network. It's kind of turned into that, it seems like, a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, you just said something there that I want to emphasize to people, which is you said the people that don't agree with it, but that are kind of afraid to speak up and fight back, you believe they represent the majority.
I think they represent, I think it's close to the majority. It probably breaks along the lines of, how the country's split in half. I think it's more than half. In my experience, I think it's more than half, because I've run into people who are definitely traditional Democrats, classic liberals, people left of center who do not agree with this stuff, and they're upset because, especially traditional scholars and people who believe in science and other things, they're like, this isn't good scholarship, this isn't good science, and they're offended by it. So I think it's more than half. So you're right. I'd have to say it is the silent majority. Yeah. I think so.
I think it is too. I really think that the true believers, as you call them, I think that they are a very, very small percentage. I think the opportunists are a larger percentage. And I think the biggest percentage of all is the people that don't agree with it, but that are not speaking up to fight back. And then you have got this little tiny percentage on the other side are people who don't agree with it and are speaking up and fighting back. And that's probably, one of the tougher places to be, because we're going to be targeted by everyone else.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's a worthy fight to have, I think.
Definitely.
So one of the things I'm really interested in is just kind of like the lived experiences of things, for lack of a better word. And one of the things that really pisses me off about this ideology is they have distorted the term lived experiences, but that's my different rant for a different day. But, I'm interested in, once you started seeing this stuff show up in the classroom, and then you started seeing maybe other teachers buy into this idea, what was that like for you when you started realizing what was happening? What was that experience like for you?
Okay, so my lived experience is, like I said, in my situation, I'm pretty fortunate because it doesn't really come in that often as it does in other situations, but it will pop in here and there. I'll go to a training where it'll be about implicit bias or different things, and it'll pop up. I raised an objection. This was probably 2 years ago. I raised an objection after, I think it was an implicit bias training, and I tried to show another side, and a colleague had said, you suffer from implicit bias. They had said that to me, and you don't, and they didn't say it as an insult. They just said, you just don't even realize your own biases. You didn't see this. You don't understand this. And I was kind of a little bit offended. It was frustrating. But in my own experience, I have to say, this stuff in my own classroom, it's interesting because when you're a teacher and you go into your classroom, you have your curriculum and you can kind of set the tone. So I don't get very political in my classroom. I just stick to the skills. I stick to the skills. I think I'm most frustrated when it gets outside the classroom, outside the school, and I talk to people in other districts and other suburbs and other places and their experiences. So in terms of my own experience in my own school, in my own classroom, it's limited. It's not really creeping up.
Well, let's broaden the question then, because you wrote a whole book about it.
Yes.
So you've been paying attention probably more than the average bear, I would think. And oh, hang on. Sorry, guys. This is a day of mishaps. I can already tell. This is like a classic Wednesday. This is hump day. So let's broaden the question. You see this coming up in education. You're paying attention. What I'll even preface it and say, when I started realizing how broad this was and how it had infected so many different parts of education and of corporate America, I started feeling like I was in clown world. I was like, what is going on? These people were normal 2 years ago, and now they're talking like robots that just are reading White Fragility all day. And so that it's a very it continues to be an odd situation for me. I feel like I'm waking up and I'm in another dimension or something, and something has come in and taken over the minds of all these formerly really smart people who are able to think critically. What has that been like for you?
It's been frustrating because it's hard to understand. It does sometimes feel like people are from two different planets, really. Depending on what news stations you watch and what news you read, you get two different narratives, you have two different experiences. So it's frustrating. And it seems like it's harder to communicate in certain situations when you talk about politics. But I have a theory on why that happens, what you talked about. I think you said critical thinking. I still teach critical thinking in my classes. I think that's the most important skill, critical thinking. Whenever we do something, I always show the students both sides, whether it's, a current event or whatever we're doing. I always say, here's the issue. Okay, here's one side. Research this, get to know it, look at the thesis. What are the arguments? Now here's the other side. What's the thesis? What are the arguments? Really research it. Know both sides, understand it, and then decide how you feel about it. And maybe even take the opposite point of view and write about it, just because it'll help strengthen your own argument. You can think critically about it. There is no, in most situations, there's no right or wrong answer. So they learn how to go out into the world and analyze and see different sides and different things. But what I think is happening now is critical consciousness. Like I talk about the difference between critical thinking, which is what I just described, and critical consciousness. Critical consciousness is you become conscious of oppression and you criticize and get active to fight back against oppression. But instead of looking at both sides of all these issues, you're indoctrinated to see one side of the issue, which is supposedly the injustice, however it's framed. And then a lot of people, because they're just indoctrinated with this limited understanding of the issues, that's all they know. And they're indoctrinated that this is right. This is like your religion. And then when they come outside and people tell them there's other points of view, they get angry. They don't understand it. They can't process it.
And that's honestly one of the most alarming parts for me about this whole thing is like, it sounds like you're doing what should be done in the classroom, right? Like you're teaching different perspectives. Or, when I was working on my PhD, one of the things they taught us when we had to go do our research is like, you write a hypothesis. Right. And then you're like, part of your job is to try to disprove your hypothesis. It's to work against your own hypothesis of what you think is going on, because that's going to keep you honest in your research. It's going to eliminate confirmation bias, things like that. That's the way it should be done. But if people are not being exposed to a variety of different perspectives, then we're setting them up for failure from the beginning. We're not giving them the tools to be able to reason through different points of view.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what's happening with, I think, especially now with COVID and everything's virtual. Oh my God. It's like you're even more in your own bubble now, especially with the news media. People get tribal, and then they get sucked into their news bubble, and they're in their own echo chamber. And then it's like you literally get different information. Like it's not only the fact that it's just one side of the issue, you don't even get half the information. And it does happen on both sides. But again, in my experience in school, I always give them both sides. My experience with my colleagues and from my, the people I know, we really try and teach these kids to be critical thinkers. Sometimes the activism and the social justice will come in where we want to make sure that we, certain teachers, I don't necessarily agree with bringing in politics, but they'll say, because of social justice, we want to end inequity and things like that. We'll bring in some more of these things that are more political. And it's like, okay, if you feel that way, as long as it's limited, it's not taking over the whole lesson. But in my approach is the skills, show them both sides, let them think through it. I'm not going to, I hope I don't show my own politics in the classroom. It's really hard to be objective. But I think I try, and I make an even more of an effort to listen to the kids who have a point of view that I might not necessarily agree with on an issue. And I'll really make an effort to explore it and listen and say, hey, that's valid. Let's look at it, and let's look at it this way,
Yeah. You do it the way it should be done.
Yeah.
All right. I just want to acknowledge, thank you, Jeff Horton, for the super chat. I just want to be able to say I support a fragile white supremacist. Thank you for your work. Thank you, Jeff, for your ongoing support. No, I mean, and I think one of the things, so I'm fighting for this bill to, for lack of a better term, ban critical race theory in New Hampshire right now. And I'm testifying for the Rhode Island one today. And one of the things that keeps coming up in arguing against this sort of bill is they say you're not going to be able to teach slavery in the classroom. You're not going to be able to teach racism in the classroom, or you're not going to be able to teach that there's systemic racism in the classroom. And that's fundamentally just not true. And instead what's going on is the bill is saying you can teach it, you just can't teach it as fact. You can
Hmm.
teach it in context with other points of view to say some people look at
Hmm.
it this way, some people look at it that way. And to me, this just makes sense. Why do you think that there are so many like educators out there that only want to be able to teach one narrow like version of a narrow perspective?
I think that they believe that it's the truth. I think that they believe that it's right, it's justice. I think that when it comes to these issues, they believe that they're so right and that this is so moral and this is like the just thing to do, that we shouldn't show the other side, because showing the other side would be injustice. So it really comes down to that. It comes down to, they believe that they know, that they're more moral or that they're smarter or whatever, that this is the way that you need to do it. But I agree with you. If you want to bring in anything, people even talk about bringing in critical race theory. People have suggested you don't even have to ban critical race theory and all of these ideas and white fragility and anti-racism and all these things. Great. But bring in other perspectives next to them and let people think through them. And it makes it stronger. If D'Angelo wants to strengthen her arguments, debate them and bring in other things, and it'll actually strengthen it, because you can go through a scientific process. But it's funny because the approach to critical race theory is the fact that there are no other perspectives allowed. That's what it seems to be. That seems to be the hallmark of it. When you do critical race theory, it's a monologue. It's an indoctrination. You are not to question or challenge. It's just the dogma. And you're right. It's not healthy. You need to have other points of view. You have to have other points of view. That's just the way education works.
Yeah. I have a class that was recorded for me by an eighth grader that is on the channel if people want to watch it, but not right now. In which it was actually their social justice unit in the class, and
Mhm.
the teacher was like slow. It was the most subtle indoctrination I've ever seen in like 20 minutes of time in a
Mhm.
classroom. In which they started off with, the Pledge of Allegiance says, "And justice for all," and you believe in justice, don't you?
Mhm.
And if you believe in justice, then you want things to be fair. And if you want things fair, well, why not make them equitable? And if you believe in equity, then you really need to believe in social justice. And let's talk about privilege, because a privilege does not allow for equity. And it was like they went from the last line of the Pledge of Allegiance to "You're a social justice warrior" in less than 20 minutes with a
Yeah.
group of 14-year-olds. And I was watching this and going, like, of course these kids are going to want fairness and justice, but they're
Sure.
not being told that there are other points of view when it comes to how to achieve that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's so many different ways. Like, there's more than one way to skin a cat. It's like we want the same things. We have the same goals, but we have different approaches. And it's just it's seems like it's very intolerant. There are no other approaches allowed. In certain cases, when I say these kinds of things, I just mean in the most extreme radical cases, which it seems like it's getting to be more and more.
Mhm.
It's happening more and more. But when you're talking about that, I still believe in traditional values, or just core values, or universal values. I don't think I've gotten into debates with people about values, and people have argued that values and principles are relative to culture and race. And
Oh,
it's like,
I know.
I can see how you can have certain cultural aspects, but when you have core values, it's like love, okay? Love, honesty, compassion, tolerance, open-mindedness, and all of these things, companionship.
Mhm.
How is that different? How is that not universal between everybody? And if you can teach kids that they can learn these important universal values and principles, they're going to be successful regardless of their identity. I think it's really unfortunate and counterproductive when you hear people say that these values are not universal, and it's divided. And you'll even hear them say, like that pamphlet from the Smithsonian last summer,
Yeah.
the African American Museum of Culture and History, the aspects of whiteness, which was retracted. But it's like, a lot of those things on that pamphlet, it's like it's an insult to everybody. It's an insult to
Right.
it's an insult to people of color. It's like, this isn't a white value. This is a universal. People who are, people who are taking charge and responsibility and doing things and having some success, they're doing these things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not just whiteness.
I remember when that pamphlet came out, like my first response to it was like, I went to Machu Picchu. On Machu Picchu, they have sundials. They could tell time. You're going to tell me that telling time is an attribute of whiteness when they literally have sundials on Machu Picchu? Come
Right.
on, come on. And
Yeah.
I agree with you. I find it to be incredibly insulting. I find, and frankly, a really racist ideology when I hear, people like Robin DiAngelo saying that, whiteness is about acknowledging that people see white as the default, white as normal. And I'm like, I don't see white as the default or normal. Like, why? Like, that's an incredibly racist idea. Or to say
Mhm.
that an attribute of whiteness to be able to work hard or tell time or to follow a schedule or any of these things. And it just seems like an incredibly racist point of view.
I agree. I think it's a lot of times people have said this before. It's projection. I think people, when they talk about Robin DiAngelo, I think there's issues of her own projection. Like you can look into her, you can see a window into her mind when
Oh,
she
I
says
know.
these things. It's like you might think these things. I don't think them. She sometimes writes it and gives these lectures that because her experience in these, in her own life and also these workshops that she's done, because she's seen it in her own personal experiences. That means everybody's like that. And
Mm.
it's kind of ridiculous because it's like, if you're working with teachers who've taught in, an urban district for decades and they're interacting and they have, cross-racial relationships and they're doing all these things and having success with kids and they have good relationships. And then she was going to say, well, you're racially ignorant. You don't understand. You don't understand. You haven't done years of sustained study,
Mm.
struggle, and whatever she says. And it's like, I don't have a PhD, but I mean, I don't think I'm racially ignorant. I don't think I am.
Well, if she ever said that to me, I would point out like one of my favorite passages in White Fragility is when she talks about going to the potluck at the park where they have different tables set up for different families, and she comes over the hill and she sees that there's one potluck that has like a lot of black people at it and the other that
Mhm.
has a lot of white people, and she stops and is like, "Oh, I hope I'm not going to the black one." I'm like, that is so
Yeah.
racist. First of all, there's probably going to be better food at the black one anyway. Like, let's just acknowledge that flat out. But like, why would you be nervous about hanging out around black people? That's racist, Robin.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because she felt that way, and that's her world. That's her lived experience. So all whites are like that.
So crazy. Well, let's talk about Kendi because, so I have to admit, I have not read all of How to Be an Anti-Racist yet because White Fragility nearly broke me.
Hmm.
And I've skimmed parts of it and I'm
Hmm.
working my way up to like a full reading and dissection of it. But tell me about Kendi because like he almost seems to be even more militant to me. And frankly, he has a $20 million Center of Anti-Racism at my alma mater, Boston
Oh
University, which
yeah.
I'm not
Hmm.
bitter about at all.
Hmm.
But he actually, to me, seems a little bit more dangerous right now than DiAngelo.
Yeah, it's interesting because he'll always frame it as he's not trying to come at people. It's just policy. That's one of the things that he always talks about. But I think it's the same situation as Robin DiAngelo with White Fragility. If you disagree with DiAngelo, you want to debate her, you have an alternative idea or solution, you suffer from White Fragility. It's just shut right down. And then it's with Kendi, it's like if you don't agree with his philosophies and all of his things, you're a racist or you believe in racist policies. And I find it, just getting back to debating the ideas. I just saw the podcast with Coleman Hughes a couple weeks ago where he was trying to arrange the debate with Kendi multiple times. I agree with a lot of the things that Coleman Hughes says. And he really made an effort. And Coleman Hughes is really respectful. He respects Kendi, and he's like, "Look, you're considered one of the leading minds on this, so I'd like to just engage with you respectfully." And he said, "Can we do it this way? We could meet at Boston University. We could do a TED Talks. He gave like 5 different options. He got a GoFundMe together. They were going to raise money for charity." And he set it all up, and Kendi just said, no, 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 no. And he refused. And I just find that it is interesting that from what I know, he doesn't debate. And it goes back to what you said. It's like, why can't you debate your ideas? Because it's not about debating the ideas. It's about indoctrinating people with the ideology. That's it. It's like, so his ideologies, I'm sure you read about that proposal that he wanted to develop that that office of equity for
I know.
what was
Yes.
what was the specifics on that? It was the Office of Social Justice or the Office of Anti-Racism or
It was something like that, some sort of like federal government agency to monitor this stuff.
yes.
Mhm.
So when you're talking about it being a slippery slope, it's like, what would that be? Like, what would they say? Like, basically, it would just look at numbers, and it just like with discipline I was talking about, is everything proportionate? And if it's not, it must mean it's racist. And then we're going to have to start doing things to make sure everything is exactly proportionate according to race. It's not organic. It's
No.
not the best way to go. You can keep an eye on it because obviously you want to make sure that there aren't too big of gaps, and you want to do things to keep things fair and equitable. But to have this office to say we're going to regulate it, and if it's not exactly by the number, we're going to have to do something about it. It's a racist policy if it doesn't come out in the wash as the equal numbers.
Yeah. It's mind-boggling. And now he's got this new paper that he's launching with, like, I think the Boston Globe, and that's getting a lot of millions of dollars of investment. And it's like, I just don't, again, I come back to the idea that I don't understand why institutions like Boston University are investing tens of millions of dollars in these ideas if these people cannot even take any criticism on a scholarly level. It seems to me to be the very like antithesis of what higher education should be. And did you hear about this new position that they just added at his anti-racism center, like a director of the narrative?
No, I
Oh
didn't.
yeah, he just hired. There's a Twitter announcement about it. The official title is Assistant Director of Narrative and Advocacy, and I was like, they hired a director of the narrative. Like,
Okay,
can you be any more in your face about what they're doing? They're
sure.
crafting a PR strategy to indoctrinate people into this ideology.
Yeah, it is. It's all about shaping the narrative. It's not really about accuracy or truth. It's not about trying to get it right. It's about trying to create a narrative so you can, because it's about power, right? Isn't that what
Yeah.
they'll admit it? It's about this power hierarchy. They're trying to, disrupt or dismantle this power hierarchy so that they can balance power, but it's not balancing it. And it's not going, the power and the things aren't going to the people who you would say maybe would need it the most. It's just new people coming in and trying to massage their way to the power so that they can control it. But it's not, I
Mhm.
don't know how equitable it's going to be overall, if it's even working or not.
No, I mean, I wouldn't imagine it really would be about equity in any way, shape, or form. So let's talk about no left turn in education. What is no left turn in education?
So No Left Turn in Education is this, it's kind of I guess you could say, an organization. It was founded by Dr. Alana Fishbein. She is from Lower Merion, and she had an issue with her school district, and she pulled her children out of the school because of the critical race theory. And then she just wanted to start an organization to, have like-minded people to come together and to talk about these things and maybe educate people so you can organize and they can understand this stuff better so that we can talk about it and try and make things, better if they're not working. So it started to grow, and it's been around for maybe 6 or 7 months now, and it's starting to grow. There's chapters in, I think, 35 states. There's Facebook pages, and I'm part of what is called the Teachers Committee. So there's kind of 3 parts to this, and it's still in development. We're getting it together. There's a part of it that's aimed to help the parents. There's a part of it for the students, and then there's a part of it for the teachers. So I'm involved in what we call the Teachers Committee at No Left Turn in Education, where right now we have about 45 teachers, and we have them from about 25 or 30 states. It's pretty interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, and they're in different districts, and we're talking, and we're all kind of on the same page. And we've come up with a strategy now where we're trying to do 3 things, and we're just organizing this. First is we want to have teacher support. So we want to develop, materials and documents and different things so we can support other teachers, like the silent majority, people who feel, they want to help. They believe in justice, but they feel intimidated or they feel like they're silenced. So we want to reach out to them and recruit them and let them know that they could be supported. And even some of the supports that we're working on and talking about is we've had contacts with some legal people where if there were situations where it could be a legal issue because your rights were violated because the federal anti-discrimination laws, when you're talking about targeting whiteness and different things like that, you could have some legal representation. And then there's also part of it where what was I going to say? The last part of this. Well, basically, That's just the teacher supports. And then the second part is we're trying to really track and watch critical race theory in terms of curriculum. We're trying to look at critical race theory in teacher trainings in curriculum in schools. Where's it going? How is it impacting people? Just so we could keep it, we can open up the lines of communication and look at it. And then we also are, in terms of that, we're trying to record data. We're trying to see if this curriculum that's based in critical race theory, what are their test scores? What are their standardized tests? They used to have more rigorous instruction, and these were the test scores. Now this critical race theory is coming in. It's more political. It's more about activism. What are their test scores like? We're trying to track that. It's a big process.
That's good.
And then the final thing is, part 3 is alternative solutions and alternative curriculum, where we're trying to develop things that are alternative, that not in place of it, but to be put side by side with it, so you could have other perspectives and other alternative things to do with the kids and offer it to the parents instead of the 1619 to 1776. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. Instead of focusing on identity politics, we want to focus on core values that are universal, that everybody can use, so we can come together and learn. So that's kind of the gist of it.
Okay. I want to play a little game in which I tell you about my very layman's perception of education right now. Mm-hmm. And you either confirm that I'm correct or you convince me that I'm wrong.
Okay.
You ready for it?
Yes.
Okay. So my perspective on this is, I spend almost all my days at the moment looking at either curriculum that has been infused with critical race theory or corporate trainings that have been infused with it. And that's the bulk of what I'm spending my non-video time doing at the moment. Okay. And I acknowledge that I am purposefully looking for the worst of examples of this happening.
Okay.
But I've simply seen so much coming from education at this point, from, kindergarten all the way up through higher education, that my perspective is that I don't know how public schools can fix this at this point. I don't know how it's possible, because for me, it seems like the teacher education programs, this stuff is rampant in them, which means that all the teachers are being trained in this ideology, which they're then bringing in to their future classrooms. And it's almost like there needs to be an entire new generation of teachers that relearns how to actually teach in the way that you've described, in terms of presenting different information and letting the students learn how to think critically for themselves. It almost feels like this is an impossible thing to fix at this point. And I'm at the point of saying, I don't know the solution to this other than school choice and homeschool. And that's it. Am I right or am I wrong?
I think you're halfway there. In my opinion, you're halfway. I think you make good points. I think that more parents are going to homeschool. I think the answer could be school choice in terms of charters and different things, or private schools or parochial schools. I personally don't believe at this point that it's not savable, that public education is totally doomed. The funny thing is, when I was getting my master's in multicultural education, there was this textbook. I forget the name of it, but it was interesting. They've been saying this for what you said about public education, they've been saying it for 50 years for different issues, for different various issues, not just this. Now it's critical race theory. So I think that there is a part of this that's a trend. I think there is a part of it that's going to run its course, and it's going to play itself out, and then it's going to come back into balance like the pendulum. I really believe that. I think that this is because of the past events of the last couple of years. You know what I mean? The George Floyd death of George Floyd. I think that accelerated it. I think President Trump was part of it. You know what I mean? I voted for Trump 3 times. Okay. And and now that Trump's not here, I think he's no longer this really got ramped up because Trump was there, I think. Yes, you know what I mean? It was like a defense mechanism against Trump, and people could say some really ridiculous things, but because it was against Trump, it was accepted, really radical. And now that Trump's not there, it's like people are saying, I don't know about that. You know what I mean? So I think that, although I agree with you and you have good points, I think that education, it's like a cycle, and I'm going to look at the glass as half full and say that it's not doomed. It's going to work itself out or settle and fit and come out somehow. That's my hope.
I really do hope you're right, man. I really do. I this is one of those instances where I genuinely hope that I'm wrong. I would be thrilled to be proven wrong. But let's talk about the acceleration under Trump for a second, because I 100% agree with you that it accelerated under Trump, and then once George Floyd died, it was like, now we're really off to the races. I mean, it basically took over my entire industry of corporate training. Once that happened, it was like there was no going back.
Mhm.
And so, but I wonder, like, was it Trump or were they just being opportunists? Because this has been a battle of inches for them for decades. And I
Mhm.
feel like the people that are really like the true believers of this ideology, they wait for opportunities and
Mhm.
then they take advantage of them. So I feel like, Trump got elected. Well, yeah, I'm sure it was a shock to their system. It was certainly a shock to mine in 2016. But,
Mhm.
I didn't go off the deep end of crazy.
Mhm.
Right. And I feel like they took advantage of the situation to say, okay, now we've got an enemy and we can further our ideology. And I think the same thing with George Floyd. Like,
Mhm.
what is it? I've talked about this many times, but like, remember when the pandemic first started and the
Mhm.
social justice warriors just got quiet for a while?
Mhm.
And it was like
Mhm.
that eerie calm where like something's wrong, they're too
Mhm.
quiet. And at the time it was like, okay, well, we've got an actual problem to deal with now. Like we don't have these fake problems
Sure.
anymore.
Right.
We have an actual problem, and that's why they're being so quiet. And then George Floyd died, and it was like
Mhm.
they were waiting for that opportunity to
Mhm.
really get back to business.
Mhm.
So do you think it was because of Trump, or do you think it was just them being opportunist?
I think that Trump kind of brought it out. I think he brought it to a head, and I think it was more a resistance to him. I think it was a good opportunity. I think people kind of joined forces, and it was an opportunity, and you could get away with things because you could just project it onto Trump, and I think that was part of it. I had a conversation with someone last night who was saying that Trump made things worse, but I didn't really get a chance to have a rebuttal. I think the resistance to Trump kind of fired things up in the culture. I don't think they gave him a chance from the start. I don't want to get into all this stuff with Trump because you could
Yeah, yeah,
talk
yeah.
about it forever.
Oh,
You know what I
totally,
mean?
totally. Yeah.
But I mean, he did his policy. Like if you look at his personality and his policy, if you look at his policy, I mean, he did some good things. I mean, his personality and his approach sometimes was abrasive and confrontational, but it's like, you know, people resisted him to the point where it was like a lot of that stuff was because it was opportunist, but it was like there was never no one ever gave the guy a chance, and it was just all this resistance, and it got ugly, and then it just made things crazy, But the good thing is Trump brought critical race theory onto the radar. Like
Yeah.
he brought it onto the radar, and it's like that was a big deal. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of things that he did that people won't give him credit for. Even now, even people who are Democrats, they will never give him credit for. But everybody, he's a very I guess you could say he's like a polarizing guy.
He's very polarizing. I mean, I remember even before I was like public with this stuff, I was tweeting about his last State of the Union where he was talking about record low African American unemployment. I was like,
Mhm.
this is great. Like, why doesn't he get credit for this? Like this, well, Carlin, that's not really Trump's economy. That was Obama's economy. And I was like, dude's been president for 3 years. It's his economy now. All right.
Right.
Like he could have taken it and he didn't. And then there were all these other excuses about why Trump couldn't get credit for this. I was like, do you guys not want low African American unemployment? Like, what? Like,
Right.
so I agree. I don't want to go deep into the Trump stuff, but I do think it made people crazy, and it
Mhm.
made them kind of lose perspective on the things that are actually important. They were so interested in hating Trump that they lost the focus on what actually matters.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I'm interested to see how this trial is going to play out with
Oh, I know.
I said this last night when I was actually doing a podcast last night as well, and I said that I hope this time that we can have some semblance of legitimately trying to work together, understand each other, see what happened, really take a look and see what happened, be honest with each other. Let's not put out misinformation. Let's not purposefully cause problems and use it for opportunity and do that. Because like last time, I mean, there was all kinds of stuff going on last time, and it was a shame. It was a shame, for everybody. A disservice was done because We just need to look at this together in an honest way and see what's going on. I hope that happens. I hope whatever comes out, whatever the decision is, it's honest, it's based in truth, and we can understand it and work past it, and that people and opportunists don't use it to, you know how it works, to misinform or to manipulate and to cause, issues. I hope.
I hope so. I do not have high hopes, but I think I'm blackpilling a little bit these days. I still think the fight is worth having, but I'm like, are we really going to win the fight? I don't know. We'll have to see. Zinni the Flu asks, are you looking into working with the Association of American Educators?
I'm sorry. That flashed up. Could you just repeat that really quickly?
Sure. Are you looking into working with the Association of American Educators?
You know what? I would have to research that more and look through that, and that could be a possibility. I would just need to know more about it and do research on that.
What do you think of the NEA?
What do I think of the NEA? That's an interesting question. I think that unions, I'm a member of the AFT, but the NEA, all unions, I mean, you need, in my opinion, you need some organized labor. Like I'm not a person who says you throw out all the unions, but like with everything, you need to have balance. It needs to be balanced, and it needs to be done in a balanced, honest way. And I think in certain situations, the unions will call them opportunists. They'll use things so that they can benefit politics and members and things like that. So one of the things I don't agree with the NEA is the fact that they adopted the BLM curriculum, because the BLM curriculum, in my opinion, I've looked through it, and not just in terms of, not even just in terms of race and social justice, just in terms of the skills. It's packed with agenda. It's not something that should be put into the classroom because of the agenda behind it. So I have an issue with the NEA in terms of the BLM curriculum.
I agree with you completely. All right, a couple more super chats. Awesome Human says Washington State dropped all arts and sports programs and put everything into special ed. Teachers are losing jobs. Do you think they're doing this to push kids into private or charters because they're broke?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I'm not sure why they did that. I'd have to do more research on that to see what the motivation might have been off the top of my head. I'm not as familiar with charters and things like that.
Okay. And Jeff Horton, thank you for the nice big super chat, Jeff. I really appreciate it. He says, you two are the real social justice warriors.
Awesome.
We appreciate that, I'm sure. All right. Well, I mean, I just to kind of like wrap things up. So if people want to learn more about No Left Turn in Education, where can they go?
So they just go to the website. I think it's No Left Turn, nolefturn.us. I'd have to double check, but I think it's also linked in your video. I think
it is in the description.
Yeah, it's in the description. So there is a link there, or you could just Google No Left Turn in Education in Google, and the site comes right up.
Yeah.
So
and I feel like, I almost feel like I'm really glad this chat happened today, because I feel like you've presented something hopeful to me. You presented, there are people fighting back against this that are reasonable people that just want to, that just want to be able to go into the classroom and teach. And you've given me the impression that all hope is not lost in this particular battle.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And it was a great conversation. I appreciate you inviting me on your show. Your show's awesome.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so thankful that you were able to make it today. I wish we could chat longer, but I got to go get ready for this thing in Rhode Island. And,
cool.
I hope that I'm able to have you back at some point in the future.
Yeah, I'd love it. I appreciate it. And good luck today.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you'd like people to know before we conclude?
Well, you can, if you really want to support, you can go buy the book,
Oh, there it is. I'm going to buy it.
It's a compact read, but I think it gives you a good toolkit to understand some of this stuff. So if you wanted to just check it out,
Excellent. Well, I definitely want to encourage everyone to check out the book. All the information, again, is in the description below. And please make sure you subscribe to Chris's YouTube channel, because he's got a lot of stuff on there. I was actually watching some of it this morning. I really want to dig in and go back through some of your older videos, because he's got lots of amazing stuff on there. If this is something that you're interested in, and you're going to be on Deb's channel, I think tomorrow, right?
Yeah, Deb filming. Yes. The Reason We Learn. So I'm going to be on there tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to that too. She's got some great stuff on her channel as well.
Oh my God. God. Deb is like one of my favorite people in the world, and you two are going to have you both speak the language of teacher. So you're
Yeah.
going to be able to have an amazing conversation, and I'm definitely going to be tuning in for that.
Awesome. I look forward to that. Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, we're going to conclude for today, but please make sure you hit that thumbs up button on the way out the door. Let me know what you think. And yeah, that's all I've got for right this second. I will see you guys soon.